I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. Mom, you didn't contribute anything to this dinner, so you don't eat. Those were the words my own daughter said to me in front of the whole family on Christmas Eve. I just stood there, my empty plate trembling in my hands, watching as everyone kept eating as if nothing had happened. What Grace didn't know was that this night would be the last time she would ever humiliate me. My name is Michelle Nelson. I'm 67 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been living in my daughter Grace's house after I lost my dear husband, James. We'd been married for 42 years when his heart gave out suddenly one spring morning. One moment we were planning our garden for the season. The next, I was planning his funeral. The first year alone in our Lincoln Park home was the hardest. The silence was deafening. I'd wake up reaching for James, only to find his side of the bed cold and empty. Depression crept in like a slow fog, clouding everything around me. Some days, I couldn't even find the energy to change out of my nightgown. Mom, this isn't healthy, Grace had said during one of her weekend visits. Concern etched across her face as she noticed the pile of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. You can't keep living like this. I remember looking around the home James and I had shared for 4 decades and feeling nothing but emptiness. The walls that once contained our laughter now echoed with silence. Why don't you come live with us? Grace had suggested, her voice gentle as she held my hand. We have plenty of space, and Emma and Ethan would love having their grandma around all the time. Her husband, Caleb, had nodded enthusiastically from across the room. The kids miss you terribly, Michelle, and we could use an extra pair of hands around the house with our busy schedules. Their Chicago home was spacious, in a good neighborhood, and my grandchildren Emma, 8, and Ethan, 5, were the lights of my life. The idea of seeing their bright faces every morning instead of staring at James's empty chair seemed like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. You wouldn't be a burden, Grace had assured me, somehow reading the worry in my eyes. This is your home now, too. I'd squeezed her hand, tears of gratitude filling my eyes. Let me think about it. But really, what was there to think about? My daughter was offering me family, purpose, connection, everything I'd been missing since James passed. Plus, I could rent out our house, giving me some additional income beyond my modest pension. 2 weeks later, I was packing boxes while Grace and Caleb arranged for the movers. As I carefully wrapped James's favorite mug chipped along the rim, but never replaced, I felt a mix of guilt and hope. Was I betraying our memories by leaving, or would James want me to find happiness again? He would want you to live, Mom, Grace said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder as if sensing my thoughts. Dad always put family first. He'd be glad you're coming to be with us. And so, on a crisp autumn day in 2021, I moved into Grace and Caleb's guest bedroom, which they'd painted a cheerful yellow for me. Emma had made a welcome sign with glitter and construction paper that hung on the door, Grandma's room knock first. That first night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she'd looked up at me with those big brown eyes so much like her grandfather's, and whispered, I'm glad you're not going to be alone anymore. Grandma. I'd hugged her tight, inhaling the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo, and felt truly hopeful for the first time since James died. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Little did I know that what had seemed like a lifeline would soon become a noose. The first month in Grace's home was everything I'd hoped for. I woke each morning to the sounds of life, Ethan's giggles, Emma practicing piano before school, the bustling rhythm of a family in motion, after months of oppressive silence. Even Caleb's off-key shower singing was music to my ears. I quickly settled into helping where I could, making breakfast for the children while Grace and Caleb prepared for work, tidying up the house during the day, and having dinner ready when everyone returned home. It wasn't that they'd asked me to do these things. I simply wanted to contribute. Mom, you don't have to cook every night, Grace had said one evening as I set a pot roast on the table, James's old recipe that had always been her favorite as a child. I know, I'd replied, smiling, but it makes me happy to do something useful. What wasn't mentioned but was clearly understood was the financial arrangement. From my monthly pension of $200, I contributed $600 toward household expenses. It seemed fair, considering I was now part of a 4-bedroom house with utilities, groceries, and other costs. This will help us cover the extra expenses, Caleb had explained when we first discussed the arrangement, his tone businesslike. Groceries for 5 instead of 4, additional water usage, electricity. I'd nodded understandingly. Of course, my presence would increase their costs. The $600 felt reasonable, even generous on their part, as Chicago housing wasn't cheap, but by the second month, I began noticing small things that gave me pause. One morning, while searching for a spare light bulb in Caleb's home office, I discovered a pile of past due notices from utility companies and a letter regarding mortgage payment delinquency. I quickly closed the drawer, feeling like I'd stumbled upon a secret I wasn't meant to see. That evening, I overheard Grace and Caleb in their bedroom, their hushed voices carrying through the thin walls. "We can't keep juggling like this. Grace," Caleb had said, frustration evident in his tone. "The credit cards are maxed out, and the bank called again today." "I know," Grace had replied, her voice strained. "But Mom's contribution helps. At least we can pay the minimum payments now. If she knew how bad things are—" "She can't know," Grace had interrupted firmly. "She'll worry herself sick, and she's just starting to look happy again. Besides, it's just temporary until you find something new." My heart had sunk into my stomach. Caleb was unemployed. Grace had told me he was between projects as a software developer. But the way they were talking suggested this wasn't a planned transition, but a job loss, and one that had happened some time ago. The next day, Grace's friend Sophie came over for coffee while I was folding laundry in the living room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their conversation in the kitchen carried. "How's it going with your mom living here?" Sophie had asked. Grace's sigh was audible even from where I sat. "It's an adjustment. She means well, but having someone else in our space all the time—" "But the financial help must be nice," Sophie had replied, lowering her voice slightly but not enough. "Especially with Caleb's situation." "God, yes. Her pension is literally keeping the lights on right now. We couldn't have made last month's mortgage payment without it." I'd sat frozen, a pair of Ethan's dinosaur socks in my hands, my chest tightening. So I wasn't a welcome addition to their home. I was a financial necessity, a walking, talking pension check. That evening at dinner, I'd studied my daughter's face as she laughed at something Ethan said, searching for signs of the resentment I'd heard in her voice earlier. But she seemed perfectly normal, affectionate even, refilling my wine glass without being asked. Was I imagining things overreacting to a private moment of frustration that any family might have? My doubts might have faded if not for what happened the following week. I was returning from a walk around the neighborhood when I met Jennifer Phillips, their next-door neighbor, bringing over a casserole. "Oh, Michelle, how nice to see you settling in," she'd said warmly. "I made this for your family when I heard about Caleb losing his job at Tech Forge. 3 months without work must be so stressful." I'd managed to thank her while maintaining a neutral expression, but inside, my mind was racing. 3 months Caleb had been unemployed since before I'd moved in, which meant Grace had invited me to live with them knowing they needed my pension, not because they were concerned about my loneliness. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, a familiar heaviness settling over me. The room that had felt like a fresh start now seemed like a cleverly disguised trap. Was I being used by my own daughter? The thought was too painful to bear. But in the morning light, as I helped Ethan tie his shoelaces and watched Emma carefully arrange her books in her backpack, I pushed my doubts aside. These were my grandchildren, my family. Even if Grace and Caleb needed my financial help, wasn't that what family was for, to support each other through difficult times? I decided to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they'd been embarrassed to admit their financial troubles. Maybe they genuinely wanted me here. And the money was just an added benefit. I would wait and watch, I told myself. After all, I had nowhere else to go. By the 6th month of living with Grace and Caleb, things had begun to change in subtle but unmistakable ways. Caleb had finally found a new job as a project manager at a smaller tech firm. The position paid less than his previous role, but it was enough to ease some of the financial pressure. I'd expected this would improve the atmosphere in the house, perhaps even allow me to reduce my monthly contribution. Instead, the opposite happened. "Mom," Grace said one evening after the children had gone to bed, "Caleb and I were looking at our expenses, and we think we might need to adjust our arrangement." We were sitting at the kitchen table, the remnants of dinner still visible on the countertops. Caleb nodded solemnly beside her, his fingers steepled in front of him like a business executive preparing to close a difficult deal. "Of course," I replied, my stomach already nodding. "What did you have in mind?" "Well," Grace continued, not quite meeting my eyes, "the cost of everything has gone up so much lately. Groceries, utilities, the children's activities." "We were thinking $800 might be more appropriate," Caleb interjected smoothly. "Considering market rates for a room in this neighborhood, it's still quite reasonable." I stared at them, trying to process what was happening. My pension was only $1.02. After giving them $800, I'd have just $400 for my medications, cell phone, personal items, and any small pleasures that made life worthwhile. "That's quite an increase," I said carefully, not wanting to create tension. "Would it be possible to discuss a more moderate adjustment?" Grace and Caleb exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "Mom," Grace said, her tone shifting to something colder, "we've done the calculations. This is what it costs to have another adult in the house. We're not a charity." The words stung like a physical slap. Not a charity. As if I were some stranger asking for handouts. Not her mother who had worked 2 jobs to put her through college, who had sacrificed vacations and new clothes and small luxuries so she could have dance lessons and summer camps and the expensive graphing calculator she'd needed for advanced math. "I understand," I said finally, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "I'll make it work." And I did, though it meant cutting back on my blood pressure medication, taking half doses some days to stretch the prescription further. It meant no more small gifts for the grandchildren, no new clothes when mine became worn, no books from the second-hand store that had been my small indulgence. What hurt more than the money, though, was how Caleb's attitude toward me transformed once he was employed again. The respectful, solicitous son-in-law disappeared, replaced by someone who barely acknowledged my presence. He began referring to me in the third person even when I was in the room. "Is she joining us for dinner?" he would ask Grace, though I was standing right there. "Does she need a ride to her doctor's appointment, or can she take the bus?" I became she and her, a fixture in the house rather than a person, and certainly not the mother of his wife, the grandmother of his children. Grace's behavior changed too, though more subtly. Small courtesies began to disappear. No one saved me a portion of dessert if I wasn't at the table when it was served. My laundry was left in the washing machine, damp and wrinkled, if I didn't move it to the dryer immediately. The television volume was turned up to near-deafening levels when I tried to read in the adjacent room. One Saturday, I came downstairs to find the house empty, a hastily scribbled note on the counter. "Went to the water park with the Johnsons, back tonight." They had taken the children on a family outing without even telling me, let alone inviting me along. I spent the day alone in the quiet house, looking through old photos of Grace as a little girl, trying to reconcile the loving daughter I'd raised with the woman who now seemed to barely tolerate my existence. The only bright spots in those increasingly difficult months were my grandchildren. Emma and Ethan remained affectionate and eager for my company, though I noticed Grace beginning to restrict our time together. "Mom, don't pick up Ethan from the bus stop anymore," she instructed. "We've arranged a play date with his friend Tyler instead. Emma needs to focus on her homework without distractions," she'd say when I offered to help with math problems I was perfectly capable of solving. Little by little, I was being pushed to the margins of family life. The pattern continued through the holidays. At Thanksgiving dinner, I noticed my place setting was at the far end of the table, away from the children, who had always insisted on sitting beside me. At Christmas, the presents I'd managed to buy with my meager remaining funds, small items purchased with careful planning and sacrifice, were opened last and with perfunctory thanks. "Another book, Grandma," Emma had said, unable to hide her disappointment after seeing the expensive electronic tablet her parents had given her. "Books don't need batteries, sweetheart," I'd replied, trying to keep my voice light. "And this one has a princess who reminds me of you, brave and clever." She'd smiled then, a genuine smile that warmed my heart, and hugged the book to her chest. These small moments sustained me through what was becoming an increasingly hostile environment. I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake in coming here, in giving up my independence and the home where at least I had been surrounded by memories of love rather than the reality of indifference. But the true breaking point came on Christmas Eve of 2023, exactly 2 years after I had moved in. I had spent all day helping in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, setting the table, decorating it with the special holiday napkins I'd ironed with care. I'd even used some of my precious remaining funds to buy small gifts for everyone: a pearl necklace for Grace that reminded me of the one James had given me on our 10th anniversary, toy cars for Ethan, and a delicate bracelet for Emma. The house smelled wonderful, filled with the aromas of roasting turkey and cinnamon from the apple pie cooling on the counter. Christmas music played softly, and for the first time in months, I felt like part of the family again. The holiday spirit seemed to have softened the sharp edges that had developed in our relationships. When dinner was ready, we all gathered around the table. Caleb carved the turkey, Grace brought out the side dishes, and the children vibrated with excitement about the presents they would open the next morning. I stood by my chair, plate in hand, waiting my turn to serve myself from the platters being passed around. When the mashed potatoes reached me, I extended my plate, only to have Grace place her hand over mine, stopping me. "Mom," she said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "you didn't contribute anything to this dinner, so you don't eat." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Christmas music playing in the background seemed to fade away as the impact of her words sank in. "But I helped prepare everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, shock making it difficult to form words. "I was in the kitchen all day." "Helping isn't paying, Mom," Grace replied coolly, not meeting my eyes. "Caleb bought the turkey. I paid for the vegetables, the wine, everything. You didn't put a single dollar toward this celebration, so you have no right to enjoy it." I looked around the table, hoping anyone would speak up. But Caleb simply continued eating, a small, satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The children stared wide-eyed, confusion evident on their young faces. "Why isn't Grandma eating with us?" Ethan asked innocently. "Because Grandma has to learn to be responsible," Grace answered, her tone deliberately patient, as if explaining something simple to a child. "When adults don't contribute, they don't get to participate." My hands trembled so badly I had to set down my empty plate to avoid dropping it. The humiliation burned through me like acid, eating away at what remained of my dignity. Little Ethan slipped from his chair and came to me, offering his dinner roll with a solemn expression. "You can have my bread, Grandma. I'm not very hungry." Before I could respond, Grace snapped, "Ethan, sit down. Grandma is fine. She's just learning an important lesson." The boy looked at me uncertainly before returning to his seat, casting worried glances in my direction. I stood frozen for another moment, watching as my family continued eating as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if they hadn't just denied food to the woman who had given birth to their mother, who had loved them unconditionally, who had contributed not just money, but time and care and love to their household. Without a word, I placed my empty plate on the table and walked upstairs to my room, each step requiring enormous effort as the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. In the solitude of my yellow bedroom, the cheerful color now seeming like a mockery, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the small Christmas tree I had set up on the dresser, its twinkling lights blurring through my tears. Something inside me shifted in that moment. The shock and hurt were still there, but rising beneath them was something I hadn't felt in years: anger. Pure, clarifying anger that burned away the fog of self-doubt and submission that had enveloped me since James's death. This was not how a mother should be treated. This was not what I deserved after a lifetime of giving. As the sounds of dinner conversation and clinking silverware drifted up from below, I made a decision. I would not continue to be a victim in a home where I was valued only for my pension check. Grace's cruel words had unknowingly set me free. In trying to teach me a lesson, she had indeed taught me one, but not the one she intended. I would discover the full truth about my daughter and son-in-law's intentions, and then I would reclaim my dignity. One careful step at a time. I slept little that night, my mind spinning with questions and painful realizations. By morning, a strange calm had settled over me. The hurt was still there, a physical ache beneath my ribs, but it was now contained within a shell of determination. I rose early, before the rest of the house stirred, and made coffee in the quiet kitchen. The remnants of last night's dinner had been cleared away, plates washed, leftovers stored in containers in the refrigerator. No one had thought to save a plate for me. As I sipped my coffee, I considered my situation with a clarity that had eluded me for months. I needed answers, not just about last night's humiliation, but about the larger question that now haunted me. What were Grace and Caleb's true intentions toward me? Was I merely a temporary financial solution to their problems? Or was there something else, something worse, that I hadn't yet discovered? The house slumbered on as Christmas morning dawned, snow falling gently outside the kitchen window. I knew it would be at least an hour before anyone else woke up. It was now or never. Setting down my cup, I made my way silently to Caleb's home office. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but after last night, I felt justified in seeking the truth by whatever means necessary. The office was neat and impersonal, a sleek desk, ergonomic chair, and minimalist decor that revealed nothing about its occupant. I hesitated only briefly before opening the top drawer of the filing cabinet where I'd previously seen the overdue notices. What I found instead was a glossy brochure for something called Fernwood Senior Living. The front featured smiling elderly people engaged in various activities, but something about their expressions seemed forced, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. I flipped it open, a chill running through me as I read the description: affordable senior housing in a communal setting, multiple residents per room for maximum socialization, convenient location just outside Chicago city limits. The brochure had been marked with yellow highlighter on certain sections, 400 month all-inclusive, and no long-term contract required month-to-month leasing available. My hands began to shake. Why would Caleb have this? Neither Grace nor I had any living parents besides me. I continued searching, finding nothing else of note in that drawer. But in the bottom drawer, buried beneath tax documents, I discovered a manila folder labeled simply MN, my initials. Inside was a printout of what appeared to be a financial worksheet. At the top, Michelle Nelson Relocation Plan. The document outlined a timeline and budget. Current contribution, $800 month. Anticipated Fernwood cost, $400 month. Net gain after relocation, $400 month plus pension direct deposit. Target move date, January 2024, January 2024, next month. I stared at the paper, unable to fully process what I was seeing. They were planning to move me to a cheap senior facility and somehow continue collecting my entire pension. How was that even possible? The sound of a door opening upstairs jolted me back to the present. Quickly, I took photos of the documents with my phone, replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, and slipped out of the office. I had barely settled back at the kitchen table when Grace appeared, wrapped in her expensive silk robe, a Christmas gift from Caleb last year. "Merry Christmas, Mom," she said, her tone neutral, as if last night's incident had never occurred. "Merry Christmas," I replied automatically, struggling to keep my expression composed while my mind screamed with newfound knowledge. She busied herself making coffee, her back to me. "About last night," she began, not turning around. "I may have been a bit harsh. The holidays are stressful, and I wasn't feeling well. Not an apology," I noted, a justification. "I understand," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "We all have our moments." She nodded, seemingly relieved by my easy capitulation, and changed the subject. "The children will be up soon, excited for presents. I hope they like what Santa brought." We made small talk as the house gradually came alive with Christmas morning excitement. Ethan bounded down the stairs first, followed more sedately by Emma, both still in pajamas. Caleb appeared last, freshly showered and dressed as if for an ordinary workday rather than a family holiday. Throughout the gift opening, I maintained a pleasant facade, exclaiming appropriately over each present and thanking them warmly for the practical gifts they'd given me: bath towels and slippers. Things one might give a distant relative or casual acquaintance. But inside, I was hyper-aware of every exchange, every glance between Grace and Caleb. When he whispered something in her ear that made her nod slightly in my direction, I wondered if they were discussing their relocation plan for me. Later that afternoon, while the children played with their new toys and Grace and Caleb were occupied in the kitchen preparing Christmas dinner to which, notably, I had not been invited to help, I slipped upstairs to my room and searched Fernwood Senior Living on my phone. The results made my blood run cold. The facility's official website showed the same smiling seniors from the brochure, but online reviews told a different story. "Understaffed and neglectful," wrote one reviewer whose mother had stayed there. "4 people crammed into tiny rooms with no privacy," said another. "Had to move my father out after finding him in the same clothes for 3 days." I scrolled through review after scathing review, my horror growing. This wasn't just an affordable senior living option. It was by all accounts a neglectful, overcrowded facility where people warehoused elderly relatives they didn't want to care for properly. And this was where my daughter planned to send me in just a few weeks. But how could they continue collecting my pension? That question nagged at me as I continued my search. The answer came when I remembered something from shortly after I'd moved in. Grace had asked me to sign some paperwork for the bank. Just routine stuff so I can help you manage your finances if needed. She'd explained. I'd signed without reading carefully, trusting my daughter implicitly. Had I unknowingly given her power of attorney access to my accounts, I checked my online banking app, something I rarely did since Grace had offered to simplify my finances by handling bill payments for me. The most recent statements showed regular withdrawals labeled household contribution, but they were for $900, not the $800 I thought I was paying. They were already taking more than we'd agreed upon. And with access to my accounts, what was to stop them from continuing these withdrawals even after moving me to Fernwood? As the realization of their plan became clear, I felt something break inside me, the last threads of trust I'd been desperately clinging to. My own daughter, my only child, had been systematically deceiving me, taking advantage of my grief and vulnerability to exploit me financially. And worse was yet to come. If their plan succeeded, I sat on my bed, clutching my phone, surrounded by the sounds of Christmas joy from downstairs that now seemed as false as the smiles in the Fernwood brochure. What I needed now was more evidence. Concrete, undeniable proof of their intentions. Something I could use if necessary to protect myself. Because I was now certain of one thing: I needed protection from the very people who should have been protecting me. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Margaret Young's number. We'd been neighbors for decades in Lincoln Park before I'd moved here. And though we hadn't spoken often since James's death, she had always been a true friend. "Michelle," she exclaimed when she answered. "Merry Christmas. How wonderful to hear from you." "Merry Christmas, Margaret," I replied, keeping my voice low. "I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday." "Not at all. My son and his family just left, and I was sitting here wondering what to do with all these leftovers. How are you? How's life with the grandchildren?" I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "That's actually why I'm calling. Things aren't going well here, and I could use some advice. Are you free for coffee sometime this week?" There must have been something in my tone that conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because Margaret's response was immediate and concerned. "Of course. How about tomorrow? Come for lunch, and we can talk properly." Relief washed over me. "That would be wonderful. But Margaret, I need to ask you not to mention this call to Grace if she contacts you. It's complicated." A pause, then, "Michelle, are you safe there?" The question caught me off guard. Was I safe physically? Yes. But in every other way, I'm not in any danger, I assured her, though even to my own ears, the words lacked conviction. "I just need to figure some things out without interference. My door is always open to you," she said firmly. "Tomorrow at noon. And Michelle, whatever's happening, remember you're not alone." As I ended the call, those words echoed in my mind. Not alone. For months, I'd felt precisely that, isolated in a house full of people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. But Margaret was right. I wasn't alone. I had options. even if I couldn't fully see them yet. I heard Emma's footsteps in the hallway and quickly composed myself, wiping away tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. She peeked around my door, her face alight with excitement. "Grandma, we're having hot chocolate with candy canes. Come downstairs." I managed a genuine smile for her. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. I'll be right there." As I followed her downstairs, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not be sent away like an unwanted package. I would not allow my pension to be siphoned while I languished in a substandard facility. I would reclaim my dignity and my future starting tomorrow. The day after Christmas dawned clear and frigid, the kind of bone-chilling cold that Chicago specializes in during winter. I dressed carefully in my warmest clothes, preparing for my lunch with Margaret. "I'm going to visit an old friend today," I announced at breakfast, deliberately casual as I buttered a piece of toast. Grace looked up from her phone, surprise evident on her face. "A friend who—" "Margaret Young," I replied, taking a small bite of toast though my stomach was too knotted to feel hungry. "We've been meaning to catch up for ages." "Margaret from Lincoln Park." Grace frowned slightly. "I didn't know you were still in touch." "We exchange holiday cards," I said with a shrug, not mentioning yesterday's call. "She invited me for lunch." Caleb, scrolling through something on his tablet, didn't bother looking up. "How are you getting there? I need the car today." "I'll take the bus," I said, having already checked the route. "It's not a problem." Grace and Caleb exchanged a look I was becoming all too familiar with, a silent communication that excluded me. "Are you sure that's wise, Mom?" "It's awfully cold, and the buses are unreliable in this weather." The concern in her voice might have seemed genuine to someone who hadn't seen the Fernwood brochure in her husband's desk. Now, I recognized it for what it was: not worry for my well-being, but concern about my movements outside their control. "I'll be fine," I assured her, forcing a smile. "I lived in Chicago my whole life. Remember, I know how to handle a little winter weather." Grace seemed about to protest further, but Ethan chose that moment to spill his orange juice, creating a distraction that allowed me to finish my breakfast in peace. As I prepared to leave, bundling up in my coat, scarf, and gloves, Grace approached me by the front door. "What time will you be home?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "I'm not sure," I replied, adjusting my scarf. "Afternoon, most likely. Don't hold dinner for me." "Mom," she said, lowering her voice although we were alone in the entryway. "About Fernwood." My heart nearly stopped. Had she somehow discovered I knew about their plans? "What about it?" I managed to ask, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Nothing," she said quickly. "We can talk later. Have a nice visit with Margaret." The bus ride to Lincoln Park was slow and crowded, but I barely noticed the discomfort. My mind was too busy processing Grace's near slip about Fernwood. It confirmed what I'd feared: they were indeed planning to move forward with sending me there. And soon, Margaret's townhouse was exactly as I remembered it: warm, cluttered with books and mementos from her travels, and smelling of cinnamon and coffee. She enveloped me in a tight hug at the door before ushering me inside. "Michelle, it's been too long," she said, helping me out of my coat. "You're thin. Are they not feeding you over there?" The question, meant as a light-hearted observation, hit too close to home after Christmas Eve. To my horror, I felt tears spring to my eyes. Margaret's expression immediately changed from welcoming to concerned. "Oh, my dear, come sit down and tell me everything." Over homemade soup and fresh bread, the first home-cooked meal I'd been offered in days, I poured out the whole story. The initial welcome, the gradual shift in attitude, the increasing financial demands, and finally, the humiliation of Christmas Eve and my discovery of the Fernwood plans. Margaret listened without interrupting, her kind face growing increasingly troubled as my tale unfolded. "Those ungrateful, conniving—" She cut herself off, visibly restraining her anger. "Michelle, this isn't just wrong, it's potentially illegal. If they're planning to access your pension without your consent—" "I'm afraid I may have already given them that consent," I admitted, explaining about the bank documents I'd signed so trustingly. "I need to find out exactly what I agreed to." "We'll figure it out," Margaret assured me, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "But first, you need to decide what you want to do. Do you want to confront them?" Move out legal action. The question gave me pause. What did I want? Certainly not to continue in a home where I was unwelcome and exploited. But where would I go? What resources did I have? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I need more evidence of their plans. Something concrete. Then that's where we'll start, Margaret said decisively. When you go back today, keep your eyes and ears open. Look for anything related to Fernwood or your finances. And Michelle, her expression turned solemn. Be careful. People who are capable of treating family this way might not react well if they realize you're onto them. I nodded, understanding her concern. I've gotten good at pretending everything is fine. You shouldn't have to pretend in your own home, Margaret said softly, a sadness in her eyes that matched my own. This isn't what James would have wanted for you. The mention of my late husband brought fresh tears to my eyes. He would be so disappointed in Grace. We raised her to be better than this. People change, Margaret sighed. Money problems, pressure from spouses. It doesn't excuse it, but it might explain it. Before I left, Margaret insisted I take her spare key. Just in case, she said, pressing it into my palm. Day or night, you're welcome here. Promise me you'll use it if you need to. The key felt heavy in my pocket as I rode the bus back to Grace's house. A tangible reminder that I had options, that I wasn't as trapped as I had felt. I arrived home in the late afternoon to find the house quiet. A note on the counter informed me that Grace and Caleb had taken the children to a movie. Leftovers in the fridge if you're hungry, it concluded, as if the events of Christmas Eve had never happened. The empty house presented an opportunity I couldn't waste. Quickly, I made my way to the master bedroom, searching for any additional evidence of their plans. I found nothing in the obvious places: dresser drawers, bedside tables, closet shelves. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a stack of mail on Grace's vanity. Beneath the department store catalog was an envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. I hesitated only briefly before carefully opening it. Inside was a letter confirming an appointment on January 3rd to discuss the power of attorney modification as requested. Attached was a draft document that made my blood run cold, a revised power of attorney giving Grace complete control over all my financial affairs, including decisions regarding residence and care facilities. This was worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just planning to send me to Fernwood. They were preparing legal documents that would strip me of any say in the matter. I photographed the letter and documents with my phone, then carefully resealed the envelope and returned it exactly as I'd found it. As I did so, I noticed a leather-bound book partially concealed beneath Grace's sweater, a journal. Its maroon cover embossed with her initials. I knew I shouldn't. Reading someone's private thoughts crossed a line, even under these circumstances. But something compelled me to open it, to seek understanding of how my daughter had become someone I no longer recognized. The most recent entry was dated December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas. Mom is becoming more difficult, she had written, constantly asking about our finances, as if it's any of her business how we spend our money. Caleb says we need to accelerate the Fernwood plan before she gets suspicious. His sister Christina visited the place last week and says it's basic but clean, and most importantly, affordable. The hardest part will be convincing her it's temporary. Caleb suggested telling her the house needs major repairs and isn't safe for her to stay during construction. I think she'll believe that she's become so passive since Dad died. I feel guilty sometimes, especially when I see how good she is with the kids. But then I remember how we struggled financially while she and Dad lived so comfortably. All those years of hearing we can't afford it when I needed things for school, while they took vacations and renovated the house. Now it's our turn to be comfortable, and her pension is part of that equation. I closed the journal, feeling physically ill. The distorted version of the past Grace had constructed to justify her actions bore no resemblance to reality. James and I had lived modestly, saving carefully for retirement. The vacations had been occasional weekend trips to Michigan. The renovations had been necessary repairs to aging plumbing and electrical systems. As for her childhood needs, we had sacrificed constantly to provide her with opportunities: music lessons, summer camps, the best schools we could afford. I had worked a second job at a department store during holidays just to afford her first laptop for college. This revisionist history wasn't just hurtful, it was a complete fabrication designed to alleviate her guilt. I carefully replaced the journal and made my way back downstairs, my mind reeling with this final devastating revelation. My daughter hadn't just developed a financial motive to exploit me, she had constructed an entire narrative in which I deserved it. In the kitchen, I mechanically heated some leftovers, though I had no appetite. As I waited for the microwave, I noticed a wall calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. January 15th was circled in red, with MNFW written inside the circle. MN, Michelle Nelson. FW, Fernwood. 3 weeks. That was how long I had before they planned to ship me off to that place. I abandoned the pretense of preparing food and sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I tried to process everything I'd learned. The pieces had come together to form a picture so clear and so ugly that I could no longer deny or excuse it. My daughter and her husband had invited me to live with them not out of love or concern, but to access my pension. They had systematically isolated me, undermined my confidence, and taken control of my finances. And now, having squeezed what they could from me while I lived under their roof, they planned to warehouse me in a substandard facility while continuing to drain my resources. The sound of a car in the driveway pulled me from my thoughts. They were home. I quickly composed myself, wiping away tears and forcing my features into a neutral expression as they bustled in with the children, bringing a rush of cold air and excited chatter about the movie. I smiled and nodded in all the right places. "Did you have a nice visit with your friend?" Grace asked as she helped Ethan with his boots. "Lovely," I replied, impressed by how normal my voice sounded. "It was good to catch up." "That's nice, Mom," she said absently, already moving on to the next task. I watched her interact with her children, my grandchildren, with genuine affection and care. How could the same person who so lovingly wiped chocolate from Ethan's chin also coldly plan to abandon her mother in a place like Fernwood? It was a contradiction I couldn't reconcile, but it no longer mattered. The evidence was clear. The threat imminent. I needed to act. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, I sat at the small desk in my room and began to formulate a plan. I would not confront them directly that might only accelerate their timeline or cause them to take more drastic measures to control me. Instead, I would prepare my escape carefully, methodically, leaving nothing to chance. I would reclaim my finances, secure a safe place to live, and ensure they could never again exploit my trust or vulnerability. Most importantly, I would do it all with the dignity they had tried so hard to strip from me. As I made notes about bank accounts to check and calls to make, I felt something unfamiliar rising within me, a sense of purpose and determination I hadn't experienced since before James died. The fog of grief and dependence that had clouded my judgment was lifting, burned away by the harsh light of truth. They had underestimated me, assuming that age had diminished my intelligence and resolve. In trying to take everything from me, they had inadvertently given me back something precious, my fight. I glanced at the family photo on my nightstand, taken on my birthday last year. All smiling faces, the perfect picture of multi-generational harmony. What a convincing facade it had been. I turned the frame face down. The time for illusions was over. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of setting myself free. The day after Christmas, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Gone was the confusion and hurt that had clouded my judgment for so long. In its place was a steely resolve I hadn't felt since my teaching days, when a particularly difficult student would require my firmest approach. While Grace and Caleb were busy with their post-holiday routines, I made my first call to First National Bank on Michigan Avenue, where James and I had kept our accounts for decades. "I need to speak with someone about my accounts," I told the customer service representative. "I have concerns about unauthorized access." The seriousness of my statement earned me an immediate appointment for the following day. I made the call from the privacy of my bedroom, door closed, speaking in hushed tones. Paranoia, perhaps, but necessary, given what I now knew. That night at dinner, I maintained my facade of normalcy. I complimented Grace on the leftover turkey casserole, asked Ethan about his new toys, and listened to Emma describe the book I'd given her, the one possession of mine she seemed to genuinely value. "The princess in this story reminds me of you, Grandma," she said, her eyes bright with admiration. "She seems quiet, but she's actually really brave and smart." Grace glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Mom's generation didn't have to be brave," she commented. "They had it easy. Affordable houses, secure pensions, cheap health care." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to remind her how James and I had scrimped and saved for 30 years to afford our modest home, how I'd worked 2 jobs while raising her, how James had delayed retirement by 5 years to ensure we'd have enough saved. Instead, I smiled at Emma. "Everyone needs courage, sweetheart. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up for yourself when it would be easier to stay silent." Emma nodded solemnly, but Grace's eyes narrowed slightly, as if sensing some hidden meaning in my words. Caleb, as usual, remained absorbed in his phone, barely acknowledging the conversation around him. The next morning, I told Grace I had another appointment. "Another friend?" she asked, her tone casual, but her eyes watchful. "Doctor's appointment," I lied smoothly. "Just a routine checkup. I might stop by the library afterward." She seemed satisfied with this explanation, though I noticed her texting someone likely Caleb as I left the house. At the bank, I met with Julian Dawson, a financial advisor in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Nelson," he greeted me warmly. "What can I help you with today?" I took a deep breath. "I need to know exactly what permissions I've given my daughter regarding my accounts, and I need to make some immediate changes." Julian nodded, typing something into his computer. "I see your daughter, Grace Harris, is listed as a joint account holder on your checking account. She also has online access to view your savings account and retirement fund, though she cannot make withdrawals from those without your signature." My heart sank. It was worse than I'd feared. "When did this happen?" "The joint checking account was established in October 2021, shortly after you moved in with your daughter. The online access permissions were added in February 2022. The timeline aligned perfectly with my move to Grace's house. They'd been planning this from the beginning." "I need to remove her access immediately," I said firmly. "All of it, and I need to open a new account, in my name only, where my pension will be deposited going forward." Julian looked concerned. "Mrs. Nelson, is everything all right?" "These are significant changes." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "My daughter and I have different ideas about how my finances should be managed." I said finally, "I need to ensure my money is being used as I intend." He nodded, asking no further questions, for which I was grateful. Over the next hour, we methodically undid the financial web Grace and Caleb had spun around me. We closed the joint checking account after transferring my remaining balance to a new account in my name only. We changed all online banking passwords and security questions. We set up direct deposit for my pension to go to the new account, starting with the January payment. We put a security alert on my credit report to prevent any new accounts being opened in my name. We verified that my life insurance policy still listed Grace as beneficiary, as I intended, but confirmed no loans had been taken against it. "Is there anything else we can help you with?" Julian asked as we completed the paperwork. "Yes," he said, thinking of the power of attorney document I'd discovered. "I need to understand what legal documents I've signed regarding my finances or care decisions." Julian checked his records again. "We have a basic power of attorney on file, giving your daughter authority to conduct banking transactions on your behalf in case of incapacitation. It was signed in November 2021. But nothing more extensive. Nothing about healthcare decisions or living arrangements. No, ma'am, not through our institution." Relief washed over me. The new power of attorney document I'd found in Grace's mail hadn't been executed yet. I was still legally in control of my own decisions. "I'd like to revoke that power of attorney," I said decisively. As I left the bank with a folder containing my new account information and copies of all the changes I'd made, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Step 1 complete. My finances were secure, or would be, once my next pension payment arrived in the new account. Now for Step 2, finding a place to live. I took a bus to Lincoln Park, to the neighborhood where I'd spent most of my adult life. Walking those familiar streets brought both pain and comfort memories of James at every corner, but also a sense of belonging I'd lost in Grace's house. Our old home was occupied by tenants now, the rental income going into an account Grace had helped me set up, another financial stream I'd need to reclaim. But that could wait. For now, I needed somewhere immediate and affordable. I found myself outside Margaret's townhouse without consciously planning to go there. She opened the door in gardening clothes, dirt smudging her cheek. "Michelle, what a surprise. Come in, come in." Over tea at her kitchen table, I told her about my bank visit. Her approval was evident in her smile. "Good for you," she said firmly. "Now what's next in your escape plan?" "I need somewhere to live," I admitted. "Somewhere I can afford on my pension after I leave Grace's house." Margaret's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, Michelle, I've been rattling around in this place alone since Arthur passed. The stairs are getting harder on my knees, and I've been thinking about converting the ground floor into a separate apartment for rental income." She paused, studying my face. "But maybe, instead of a stranger, I could have a friend living here. Someone I trust. Someone who might help with the occasional grocery run or keeping an eye on the place when I visit my sister in Florida." "Margaret," I said carefully, not wanting to misunderstand, "are you offering me a place to stay?" "I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement," she corrected with a smile. "You need affordable housing. I need company and occasional assistance. The ground floor has that small bedroom and half bath. We could share the kitchen. I'd ask for modest rent, well below market rate." It seemed too perfect, too convenient a solution to appear just when I needed it most. "I can't impose on you like that," I protested weakly. "Nonsense," Margaret replied briskly. "I've been meaning to do this conversion for ages. You'd be doing me a favor, giving me the push I need. And it would be temporary until you decide what you want long term." By the time I left Margaret's house that afternoon, we had a tentative agreement. She would begin clearing out the ground floor room immediately, and I would move in as soon as I was ready to leave Grace's house, which, given the January 15th date circled on their calendar, needed to be soon. But I wasn't quite ready. There was one more thing I needed irrefutable proof of their plans. Something so concrete that they couldn't deny or explain it away when the confrontation inevitably came. I found my opportunity 2 days later. Grace and Caleb both worked from home most days, but on Thursdays, Caleb had in-person meetings at his office downtown. With Grace focused on a virtual conference in her home office, the house was quieter than usual. I knocked softly on Grace's office door during what I knew would be her lunch break. "Mom," she looked up from her salad, irritation flashing briefly across her face. "I'm in the middle of something." "I'm sorry to disturb you," I said, infusing my voice with the apologetic tone she'd come to expect. "But there's something wrong with the shower in my bathroom. The water's barely lukewarm." She sighed heavily. "Did you check if someone was running the dishwasher? You know that affects the hot water." "The dishwasher isn't running," I sassy said. "Could you take a look? I'm worried there might be something wrong with the water heater." Grace glanced at her computer screen, clearly reluctant to step away. "Can it wait until after my meeting? I have participants joining from 3 time zones." "Of course," I said, adding hesitantly, "though I was hoping to shower before my doctor's appointment this afternoon." With another dramatic sigh, Grace stood up. "Fine, let me take a quick look." As she headed upstairs to inspect the perfectly functional shower, I slipped into her office. Her laptop sat open on the desk, still logged in. I had perhaps 5 minutes before she'd discover my ruse. Working quickly, I searched her email for Fernwood. The results appeared immediately, a folder labeled Mom Fernwood, containing dozens of messages. I clicked on the most recent, dated just yesterday, from Christina Mitchell to Grace. "Spoke with the Fernwood administrator today. They can definitely take her on January 15th as planned. They have a bed available in the 4-person room we looked at during our tour. $400 a month is quoted, though there may be additional fees for certain services. Attached is the intake paperwork they need completed ASAP." Grace had replied, "Perfect." Caleb and I are still figuring out how to approach it with her, thinking we might tell her it's temporary while we renovate the bathroom in her room. By the time the renovation would be complete, she'll hopefully be settled in there and less resistant to staying. The new POA should be finalized next week, so timing works perfectly. My hands shaking, I forwarded the entire email thread to my personal email account, along with several others from the folder that detailed their plans. I had just closed the email program when I heard Grace's footsteps on the stairs. I quickly moved away from her desk and pretended to be examining a family photo on the bookshelf when she entered. "There's nothing wrong with your shower," she said accusingly. "The water is plenty hot." "How strange," I murmured, feigning confusion. "It was cold earlier. Perhaps it's fixed itself." Grace's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but her phone chimed with a meeting reminder before she could question me further. "I have to get back to my conference. Please don't interrupt again unless it's an actual emergency." "Of course, dear. Sorry for the false alarm." As I closed her office door behind me, a strange mixture of emotions washed over me. Triumph at having secured the evidence I needed, vindication that my suspicions had been correct, but also a profound sadness that it had come to this sneaking around, gathering evidence against my own daughter as if preparing for a court case. But that evidence had given me something invaluable certainty. There was no room for doubt now, no possibility that I was overreacting or misunderstanding. Their plan was real, imminent, and detailed, and now, armed with proof and protected financially, I could finally begin my countermove. With January 15th, my scheduled transfer to Fernwood just 2 weeks away, I knew I needed to act quickly but carefully. The worst thing I could do was tip my hand too early, allowing Grace and Caleb time to adapt their plans or, worse, accelerate them. I spent the next few days methodically preparing for my departure while maintaining a facade of oblivious normalcy. Each time Grace mentioned something about changes coming soon, or Caleb made remarks about how I wouldn't have to worry about home maintenance much longer, I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the trusting, slightly confused elderly mother they believed me to be. Meanwhile, I was anything but confused. I had begun quietly packing my essential belongings when no one was home: medications, important documents, irreplaceable photos, and enough clothing for a week. I stored these items in 2 small suitcases hidden in the back of my closet behind winter coats no one would think to move in January. I had also made several crucial phone calls from the privacy of the public library downtown 1. To my attorney, Michael Abernathy, who had handled our wills and estate planning for years. I explained the situation and asked him to prepare documents revoking any powers of attorney I had granted to Grace. 2. To Dr. Eleanor Wright, my physician, requesting a letter stating I was of sound mind and capable of making my own medical and financial decisions. Such documentation might prove valuable if Grace tried to challenge my competency. 3. To the tenant currently renting my Lincoln Park home, explaining that there would be changes in where to send the rent check starting in February. 4. To the Social Security Administration, confirming the change of deposit information for my monthly benefits. Each call was a strand in the safety net I was weaving for myself, a protection against the free fall Grace and Caleb had planned for me. The most difficult preparation, however, was emotional rather than practical. I had to accept that my relationship with my daughter was fundamentally broken, perhaps beyond repair. The Grace who had once brought me dandelions from the yard and cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "You need to decide how much contact you want with her after you leave," Margaret advised during one of our planning sessions at her house. "And with the grandchildren, of course." The grandchildren. My heart ached at the thought of Emma and Ethan. They were innocent in all this, yet I would be disappearing from their daily lives. Would Grace poison them against me once I was gone? Tell them Grandma had abandoned them. "I want to maintain a relationship with Emma and Ethan," I said firmly. "But I can't predict how Grace will react when she realizes what I've done." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "You might need to prepare a letter for them, something they can read when they're older, explaining why you left and that it had nothing to do with them." It was good advice. That night, I began drafting 2 letters, one for each grandchild to be given to them when they were old enough to understand. I wrote of my love for them, my reasons for leaving, and my hope that we would remain connected despite the circumstances. I sealed these in envelopes labeled with their names and tucked them into my suitcase alongside a small gift for each: my mother's pearl earrings for Emma and James's pocket compass for Ethan. As the days passed, I noticed Grace watching me more closely, as if sensing something had changed. One evening, as I helped Emma with her homework at the kitchen table, Grace observed us from the doorway with an unreadable expression. "You seem different lately, Mom," she said when Emma had gone upstairs to bed. "More, I don't know. Alert, energetic," I offered a non-committal smile. Perhaps it's the new vitamin supplement Dr. Wright recommended?" Grace's eyes narrowed slightly. "When did you see Dr. Wright? I don't remember driving you to an appointment." "Margaret took me," I lied smoothly. "Last week, when you and Caleb were both working. I didn't want to bother you." "You should tell me about these appointments," she said, a hint of irritation in her voice. "I'm responsible for your care." The statement, delivered so casually yet with such presumption, might have once made me shrink back, apologetic and acquiescent. Now it only strengthened my resolve. "You're right," I replied mildly. "I'll be sure to keep you informed in the future." She seemed satisfied with my apparent submission, but as she turned to leave, she added, "By the way, Caleb and I want to talk to you this weekend about some changes we're considering for the house. Nothing major, just some renovations that might impact you temporarily." And there it was, the beginning of their temporary relocation narrative, right on schedule. "That sounds interesting," I said, working to keep my voice neutral. "I look forward to hearing about it." As January 10th approached the date I'd set for my departure, 5 days before their planned Fernwood transfer, I found myself becoming increasingly anxious. Not about the logistics, those were meticulously arranged. I was anxious about the confrontation that would inevitably follow my disappearance. Would Grace be angry, hurt, relieved? Would she try to track me down, either out of genuine concern or to regain control of my finances? How would Caleb react when he discovered I'd closed our joint accounts and redirected my pension? You can't control their reactions. Margaret reminded me during my final visit to her house before the move. You can only control your actions and responses. She was right, of course. I had spent too long worrying about Grace's feelings while she had shown little concern for mine. It was time to prioritize my own well-being. On January 9th, the day before my planned departure, I spent extra time with Emma and Ethan. I helped Emma practice her spelling words for Friday's test. I built a Lego spaceship with Ethan, marveling at his creativity and imagination. I memorized their faces, their voices, the weight of them against me when they hugged me goodnight. "I love you very much," I told each of them as I tucked them into bed. "No matter what happens, no matter what anyone tells you, I will always love you." Emma looked at me curiously. "Why are you saying it like that, Grandma?" "Like you're going somewhere." My heart clenched. Children were so perceptive, so attuned to nuances adults often missed. "I'm not going anywhere," I assured her, which was true in that moment. "I just want you to always remember how much I love you." She seemed satisfied with this explanation, but as I turned to leave, she called out, "Grandma, I love you too, even when Mom and Dad are mean to you. I still love you." I paused in the doorway, struck by her words. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma fidgeted with her blanket. "Like at Christmas, when Mom wouldn't let you eat dinner with us. That was mean. Dad told her afterward it was too harsh and might make people ask questions if Emma or I told anyone at school." The revelation that Caleb had been concerned not about the cruelty of the act, but about its potential to raise outside suspicions was both shocking and yet entirely consistent with what I now knew of him. "Thank you for telling me that," I said softly. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but my love for you never changes." That night, I finalized my preparations. I placed my letter to Grace explaining my departure and explicitly forbidding any attempt to contact me, except through my attorney on the pillow where it would be found after I was gone. I checked my new phone, purchased with cash and known only to Margaret and my attorney, to ensure it was fully charged. I confirmed my transportation for the morning, a taxi scheduled to arrive at 10 a.m., when both Grace and Caleb would be on work calls. As I lay in bed for my final night in my daughter's house, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The anxiety and doubt that had plagued me for days had dissipated, replaced by a quiet certainty that I was doing the right thing the only thing to protect myself and my dignity. Tomorrow would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It would be painful, yes, but also liberating. A reclamation of self that was long overdue. With that thought, I drifted into the most peaceful sleep I'd had in months. January 10th dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and catching dust motes in its golden beams. I rose early, before anyone else was stirring, and went through my morning routine one last time in this house. I showered in the bathroom Grace had falsely claimed would soon be renovated as their excuse to move me to Fernwood. I dressed in layers, a practical choice for January in Chicago, but also to minimize the bulk of clothing I needed to pack. I made my bed with hospital corners, the way my mother had taught me, smoothing the quilt with gentle hands. Downstairs, I prepared breakfast for the family as I did every morning: oatmeal for Grace, eggs and toast for Caleb, colorful cereal for the children. I set the table with care, placing a small folded note under each child's plate, not goodbye letters, just simple I love you messages they would find after I was gone. By 7:30, the house was coming alive. Emma appeared first, still in pajamas, her hair a tangled mess. I hugged her a moment longer than usual, inhaling the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Grandma, you're squishing me," she giggled, pulling away. "Sorry, sweetheart. I just love you very much." Ethan thundered down the stairs next, full of 5-year-old energy despite the early hour. "Grandma, I had a dream about dinosaurs. They were flying and they had laser eyes." "That sounds amazing," I said, helping him into his chair. "Tell me all about these laser-eyed dinosaurs." Grace and Caleb arrived last, already dressed for their workday, already immersed in their phones. They mumbled perfunctory good mornings, accepted the coffee I poured them, and proceeded to ignore me as they discussed their schedules. "Remember, we have that call with Fernwood at 2, Caleb said to Grace, not bothering to lower his voice despite my presence at the stove. "I've got it on my calendar," Grace replied. "And the POA appointment tomorrow at 10. They spoke about me, about my future, right in front of me, so confident in my obliviousness, so certain of their control, that they didn't even bother to hide their plans anymore." I said nothing, continuing to scramble eggs as if I hadn't heard. Let them think me deaf as well as stupid. I thought their underestimation of me was my greatest advantage. The morning routine proceeded as normal, the rush to get children dressed and backpacks packed, the hurried goodbyes as Grace took them to school, Caleb's retreat to his home office for his 9 a.m. conference call. By 9:30, the house had settled into its usual weekday quiet. I waited until I heard Caleb's door close and the murmur of his voice on his call before making my move. Quietly, I retrieved my packed suitcases from their hiding place and brought them downstairs, placing them by the front door. I put on my coat, scarf, and gloves, tucking my new phone and Margaret's key safely in my pocket. For a moment, I stood in the entryway, looking around at the house that had been my home for 3 years. Despite everything, there were good memories here: Ethan's first steps across the living room floor, Emma learning to ride a bike in the driveway, bedtime stories and birthday cakes, and small moments of connection with my grandchildren. But the bad had come to outweigh the good, and staying would mean surrendering not just my finances, but my autonomy, my dignity, my very self. At precisely 10 a.m., my phone vibrated with a text from the taxi driver. "Outside when you're ready." I took one last look around, then picked up my suitcases and walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. The taxi driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, helped me place my luggage in the trunk. "Where to today?" she asked cheerfully. "Lincoln Park, please," I replied, giving Margaret's address. "I'm going home." As we pulled away from the curb, I resisted the urge to look back at the house. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, on the city passing by outside the window, on the future I was choosing for myself rather than the one that had been chosen for me. The ride to Margaret's took just over 30 minutes. She was waiting at the door when we arrived, rushing out to help with my bags despite my protests. "Welcome home," she said, hugging me tightly once we were inside. "How do you feel?" "Free," I replied honestly, "and terrified, and sad. All at once." Margaret nodded understandingly. All normal reactions. Come on, let's get you settled. The ground floor room she had prepared for me was small but bright, with a freshly made bed, a comfortable armchair by the window, and a small desk. She had added touches that brought tears to my eyes, a vase of fresh flowers, a framed photo of James and me on our anniversary, a quilt she knew I'd admired from her collection. "Margaret, this is too much," I began, but she waved away my protests. "Nonsense. You do the same for me. Now, unpack and rest. I've made soup for lunch whenever you're ready." I spent the afternoon settling into my new space, arranging my belongings, and adjusting to the strange mix of freedom and disorientation that came with such a dramatic change. Margaret gave me space while remaining available, sensing my need for both solitude and support. Around 3 p.m., my new phone rang Michael Abernathy, my attorney. "Mrs. Nelson," he greeted me. "I filed the paperwork revoking the power of attorney as you requested. I also have Dr. Wright's letter confirming your cognitive capacity on file. Is there anything else you need at this point?" "Not yet," I replied. "But I expect my daughter will react strongly when she discovers I've left. She may try to claim I'm incompetent or that I've been manipulated into leaving." "Let her try," Michael said confidently. "We have everything in place to counter such claims. And remember, you're a competent adult. You have every right to live where you choose and manage your finances as you see fit." His reassurance bolstered my resolve. I thanked him and ended the call, feeling more secure in my decision. At 4:30 p.m., my old phone, which I had brought with me, deliberately began ringing. Grace's name flashed on the screen. It had begun. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to her message. "Mom, where are you? I came home early and you're not here. Call me back immediately." Her tone was more irritated than concerned, as if I had inconvenienced her by not being where she expected me to be. 5 minutes later, another call, another voicemail. "Mom, this isn't funny. If you've gone somewhere, you need to tell me. I'm responsible for you. Call me back now." The calls continued, increasing in frequency and urgency. By 6 p.m., Grace's voice had shifted from annoyed to panicked. "Mom, please, we're worried sick. If you can hear this, please call us. We don't know where you are or if you're okay. The neighbors haven't seen you. Please call." I felt a twinge of guilt at her apparent distress, but reminded myself of the emails I'd seen, of their detailed plans to ship me off to Fernwood in 5 days' time. Her concern now was not for my well-being, but for the disruption of her carefully laid plans. At 7 p.m., a new voicemail. This one from Caleb. "Michelle, this has gone on long enough. Whatever game you're playing, it needs to stop. Grace is upset. The kids are asking questions. If you don't call back within the hour, we're calling the police to report you missing." His thinly veiled threat didn't frighten me. In fact, it confirmed I had made the right decision. I was not a wayward child or a criminal to be threatened back into compliance. Shortly after 8 p.m., my attorney called again. "Mrs. Nelson, I've received a call from your daughter. She's frantic, claiming you've disappeared and may be cognitively impaired or in danger." "Did you tell her where I am?" I asked, suddenly anxious. "No," he assured me. "I explained that you are a client of mine, that you are safe, of sound mind, and have chosen to leave her home of your own free will. I informed her that you do not wish to disclose your location at this time, and that all communication should go through my office." How did she react? I held my breath, waiting for his answer. "Not well," he admitted. "She threatened legal action, claimed you were being manipulated, insisted you weren't capable of making these decisions. I reminded her that we have medical documentation proving otherwise, and that forcing you to return would constitute elder abuse." Elder abuse. The term sent a chill through me. Was that what I had experienced? The financial exploitation, the isolation, the humiliation, they all fit the definition I'd read about in pamphlets at the senior center. "Thank you, Michael," I said sincerely. "I appreciate your handling this." "It's my job," he replied simply. "But Mrs. Nelson, Michelle, you should prepare yourself. This likely isn't over. Your daughter struck me as determined." His prediction proved accurate. Around 10 p.m., as Margaret and I were having tea in her kitchen, the doorbell rang. Margaret peeked through the curtains and turned to me, her expression grim. "It's Grace," And Caleb, my heart began racing. How did they find me? Your daughter was always resourceful, Margaret said, a hint of admiration in her voice despite the circumstances. What do you want to do? You don't have to see them. I considered my options. I could hide in my room, let Margaret send them away. I could call the police if they refused to leave. I could continue avoiding the confrontation that was inevitably coming, but avoidance had never been my way. Not really. I had avoided conflict with Grace for too long, and look where it had led us. I'll speak to them, I decided, rising from my chair, but on my terms, here, where I feel safe, with you present. Margaret squeezed my hand. I'm right here with you. Taking a deep breath, I nodded for her to open the door. Grace burst in the moment the door opened, her face flushed, eyes wild with a mixture of anger and what might have been genuine concern. Mom, she cried, rushing toward me. What are you doing? Why did you leave like that? Do you have any idea how worried we've been? Caleb followed more slowly, his expression calculating as he took in Margaret's home and my composed posture at the kitchen table. Hello, Grace, I said calmly, not rising to meet her. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. Fine, fine, her voice rose hysterically. You disappeared without a word. We thought you'd been kidnapped or had wandered off confused. We've been calling hospitals, police. I left you a letter, I interrupted. On my pillow. Did you not find it? She faltered momentarily. That rambling note, Mom. It didn't make any sense. All that nonsense about Fernwood and us taking your money. It wasn't nonsense, I said quietly but firmly. It was the truth. I know about your plans to send me to Fernwood on the 15th. I know about the new power of attorney you plan to have me sign. I know everything. Grace. The color drained from her face. Behind her, Caleb stepped forward, his demeanor shifting to something more aggressive. What have you been telling her? He demanded of Margaret, who stood calmly by my side. I've told her nothing she didn't already discover for herself, Margaret replied evenly. I reached into my pocket and withdrew my phone, pulling up the emails I had forwarded from Grace's account. Your conversations with Christina about Fernwood, your discussion of how to trick me into going there by claiming it was temporary during renovations, your plans to access my pension after I was gone. Grace's shocked expression confirmed what I already knew. She had never expected me to find this evidence. Never imagined I was capable of such initiative. Those were private emails, she stammered. You had no right, and you had no right to plan my life without my knowledge or consent, I countered. No right to take my money, to humiliate me, to treat me as if I were already incapacitated. Caleb's face had darkened with anger. This is ridiculous. You're clearly confused and being manipulated by your friend here. We're taking you home. He took a step toward me, but Margaret moved between us. I suggest you stop right there. Mr. Mitchell, Michelle has made her decision, and she's well within her rights to do so. She's an elderly woman who needs care, Grace protested, tears now streaming down her face. Mom, please, you're not thinking clearly. Come home with us, and we can talk about all this. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years, I replied. And I'm not coming back. Grace, not to be shuttled off to Fernwood, not to have my pension drained, not to be treated like a burden rather than a mother. Is this about Christmas Eve? She asked incredulously. I told you I was sorry about that. It was just stress talking. You can't throw away our family over one bad night. It wasn't one night, I say. My voice steady, despite the emotion building in my chest. It was 3 years of small cruelties, of isolation, of treating me as a source of income rather than a person deserving of respect. I stood up then, facing my daughter fully. I've revoked your access to my accounts. I've redirected my pension to a new bank. I've revoked the power of attorney and established legal protections to prevent you from claiming I'm incompetent. I've reclaimed control of the rental income from our old house. With each statement, I watched Grace's expression shift from disbelief to understanding to a kind of panicked calculation. Mom, she said, her voice dropping to a pleading whisper. We need that money. The mortgage, the kids' activities, Caleb's car payment. Then perhaps you should have treated the source of that money with more dignity, I replied simply. Caleb's patience had clearly run out. "This is absurd. You're coming home with us right now, even if I have to carry you." He took another step forward, but Margaret had already reached for her phone. "One more step, Mr. Mitchell, and I call the police. Attempted kidnapping is a serious charge." He froze, visibly weighing his options. Grace put a restraining hand on his arm. "Caleb, don't," she murmured. "Not like this." She turned back to me, her expression hardening. "Fine. Mom, stay here if that's what you want, but don't expect to see Emma and Ethan again. You've chosen your pride over your grandchildren." The threat struck deeper than she could know, but I had anticipated it. "That's your choice, Grace. But remember, they'll grow up. They'll ask questions about why Grandma disappeared. What will you tell them? That you shipped me off to a facility because my presence was inconvenient? That you needed my pension more than you needed me?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. "You don't understand," she said weakly. "We were trying to do what was best for everyone." "No," I corrected gently. "You were doing what was easiest and most profitable for yourselves. And now I'm doing what's best for me." Caleb tugged at Grace's arm. "Come on. This is going nowhere. She's made her choice." He glared at me with undisguised hostility. "Don't come crawling back when you realize you can't manage on your own." "I believe Michelle has managed quite well so far," Margaret interjected. "Now, I think it's time for you both to leave." After they had gone, closing the door with a force that rattled the windows, I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had drained me, leaving me hollow yet somehow lighter. "You did well," Margaret said, sitting beside me and pouring fresh tea into my cup. "Very well indeed." Did I wondered aloud, watching the steam rise from my cup. "I've just lost my daughter. Possibly my grandchildren." "You lost your daughter long before tonight," Margaret said gently. "The moment she began seeing you as a resource rather than a mother. As for the grandchildren, give it time. Truth has a way of surfacing, especially with children involved." I nodded, too emotionally spent to argue. The future stretched before me uncertain, yes, but also open with possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider in years. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, my dignity, my sense of self. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since James died, I was walking it on my own terms. That night, in my small but safe new room, I slept without dreams, wrapped in the peace that comes from knowing you have finally stood up for yourself, no matter the cost. The weeks following my departure from Grace's house were a strange mix of liberation and loss. I would wake each morning momentarily disoriented, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of Emma practicing piano or Ethan's cartoon shows blaring from the living room. Instead, I heard the gentle ticking of Margaret's grandfather clock and the distant hum of traffic on Lincoln Avenue. My small room quickly became a sanctuary. I arranged my few possessions with care, James's photo on the nightstand, my books neatly stacked on the shelf Margaret had installed. My clothes hung in the closet that smelled faintly of cedar and lavender sachets. It wasn't the spacious bedroom I'd had at Grace's, but it was mine in a way that space had never been. "You're looking more like yourself every day," Margaret commented one morning in late January as we shared coffee at her kitchen table. "There's color in your cheeks again," I smiled, warming my hands around the mug. "I feel more like myself, too. It's strange I didn't realize how much energy it took just to exist in that house. Always walking on eggshells, always trying to anticipate what might trigger criticism." Margaret nodded sympathetically. "When you're constantly braced for the next blow, it takes a toll." And blows had continued to come. Even after my departure, Grace had followed through on her threat to cut off contact with the grandchildren. My attempts to send them cards for Valentine's Day had been returned unopened. My attorney reported that Grace had indeed consulted a lawyer about having me declared incompetent, but the attempt had gone nowhere in the face of Dr. Wright's clear statement of my cognitive capacity. The most surprising development came in early February, when I received a call from Jennifer Phillips, Grace's neighbor. "Michelle, it's Jennifer, from next door to Grace. I hope you don't mind my calling." Margaret gave me your number when I ran into her at the grocery store. Not at all, I replied, curious about this unexpected contact. How are you, Jennifer? I'm well, thank you. She hesitated. I wanted you to know that Emma and Ethan ask about you all the time. They miss you terribly. My heart clenched. I miss them too, more than I can say. Grace told everyone you had a mental breakdown and had to be placed in a facility, Jennifer continued, her voice lowering conspiratorially. But Ethan let slip that you'd left a note saying you were fine and living with your friend. The poor kids are so confused. I sighed, unsurprised but still disappointed by Grace's fabrication. Thank you for telling me this, Jennifer. It helps to know what they've been told. There's something else, she added. They're selling the house. I saw the realtor's sign go up yesterday. It's not officially listed yet, but Emma told my daughter they're moving to a smaller place. This news did surprise me. The house had been Grace and Caleb's pride and joy, a symbol of their success, with its large yard and prestigious address. Selling it seemed drastic. Do you know why? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Emma said something about money problems, Jennifer replied. I think your departure might have affected their finances more than they anticipated. After we hung up, I sat for a long time on the edge of my bed, processing this information. The image of Emma and Ethan confused and missing me brought tears to my eyes. But the news about the house sale confirmed what I had already known. My financial contribution had been far more significant to their lifestyle than they had ever acknowledged. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction. They had planned to discard me while continuing to benefit from my pension. Now they were facing the consequences of losing that income. But the larger part of me felt only sadness. This wasn't the future I had wanted for any of us. February turned to March, and with the changing season came unexpected new directions in my life. Margaret had introduced me to her book club, a group of vibrant women in their 60s and 70s who met weekly at the local library. Through them, I connected with the community center's volunteer program and began spending Tuesday afternoons helping elementary school children with reading skills. You were a teacher once, weren't you? Asked Eleanor, the white-haired program coordinator, after observing my session with a struggling third grader. English literature, high school level, I confirmed. But that was decades ago. You haven't lost your touch, she said approvingly. We could use someone with your skills in our adult literacy program too, if you're interested. By April, I was volunteering 3 days a week with children's reading on Tuesdays, adult literacy on Thursdays, and the Senior Center's memoir writing group on Fridays. For the first time in years, I felt useful, valued for my knowledge and abilities rather than merely tolerated for my pension check. My financial situation had stabilized as well, without Grace and Caleb siphoning off most of my income. My modest pension and the rental income from our Lincoln Park house proved more than adequate for my needs. I insisted on paying Margaret fair rent for my room, though she protested it wasn't necessary. We agreed on a mutually beneficial arrangement, I reminded her. Not charity. I had even begun setting aside a small sum each month for Emma and Ethan's future education. They might not be in my life now, but someday, I hoped. We would reconnect, and I wanted to have something tangible to show that they had remained in my thoughts and plans. The only shadow on my new life was the persistent ache of missing my grandchildren. I kept their photos on my dresser, bought books I thought they might enjoy when they were older, and sometimes found myself absent-mindedly picking up small treasures for them, a pretty stone for Emma's collection, a toy dinosaur that reminded me of Ethan's fascination with prehistory. Have you thought about reaching out to Grace again? Margaret asked one evening in late April as we worked on a jigsaw puzzle in her living room. I carefully placed a piece in the developing landscape before answering. Every day. But what would be different? She made her position clear. People change, Margaret observed, especially when reality forces them to confront their mistakes. I considered this. You think selling the house might have been a wake-up call for her? It's possible, Margaret said, studying a puzzle piece thoughtfully. Financial necessity has a way of clarifying priorities. I wasn't ready to make that overture. Not yet. The wound of Grace's betrayal was still too raw, the memory of her willing participation in the Fernwood plan too vivid. but Margaret's words planted a seed that would germinate in the weeks to come. May brought unexpected news through my attorney. "Mrs. Nelson," Michael said when I answered his call, "I've received a communication from your daughter." My pulse quickened. "What does she want?" "It's rather unexpected. She's requesting permission to visit you." I sat down abruptly, caught off guard. "Visit me. Did she say why?" "Her email was brief," he replied. "She wrote that she would like to speak with you in person and is willing to meet on neutral ground, at a time and place of your choosing, with or without my presence as you prefer." I was silent, processing this development. "You don't have to decide immediately," Michael continued. "Take some time to think about it. And remember, you're under no obligation to see her if you don't wish to." After hanging up, I walked to the small park across from Margaret's townhouse. Spring was in full bloom, the trees laden with fresh green leaves, daffodils nodding in the breeze. I found an empty bench and sat, watching a young mother pushing a toddler on a swing nearby. Why now? After months of silence, what had changed? And more importantly, was I ready to face Grace again? To risk reopening wounds that had only begun to heal? I thought of Emma and Ethan, of the possibility, however slim, that this might be a step toward reconnecting with them. I thought of the decades of love and shared history between Grace and me that had preceded these difficult years. And I thought of James, of what he would advise if he were here. "Give her a chance to explain," I could almost hear him say, "not for her sake, but for yours, so you can move forward without wondering." That evening, I asked Margaret's opinion. "It's entirely your decision," she said carefully, "but I think there might be value in hearing what she has to say, as long as you're well protected." "What do you mean by well protected?" I asked. "Meet in public, have someone with you, me, or your attorney, or both. Set a time limit in advance, and most importantly, be clear about your boundaries before you go." Her practical approach helped calm my swirling thoughts. I could agree to this meeting without committing to anything further. I could listen without being obligated to forgive. I could maintain the autonomy I had fought so hard to reclaim. The next day, I called Michael and asked him to arrange a meeting for the following week. "A public place," I specified. "Perhaps the cafe near your office, and I'd like you to be present, at least initially." When he confirmed the arrangements Wednesday at 2 p.m. at Lakeside Cafe, I felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. Whatever Grace wanted to say, I would listen with an open mind but a guarded heart. The day of our meeting dawned sunny but cool, a perfect Chicago spring day. I dressed with care in a cornflower blue blouse that James had always said brought out my eyes, paired with navy slacks and comfortable walking shoes. I wore the pearl earrings he had given me on our 30th anniversary and applied a light touch of makeup not to impress Grace, but to remind myself of my own worth and dignity. Margaret drove me to the cafe, promising to return in exactly 1 hour. "Call if you need me sooner," she instructed as I got out of the car. "I'll be shopping just 2 blocks away." Michael was already waiting at a corner table when I arrived, his briefcase open as he reviewed some papers. He stood when he saw me, offering a reassuring smile. "Mrs. Nelson, you look well." "Thank you, Michael, and thank you for being here." He checked his watch. "Your daughter should arrive any moment. Would you like coffee while we wait?" I had just received my tea when the cafe door opened and Grace entered. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face drawn, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She wore a simple gray dress I didn't recognize more subdued than her usual bold style, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail rather than the carefully styled waves she had favored. Her eyes found mine immediately, and for a moment she hesitated, uncertainty written across her features. Then she approached our table with measured steps. "Mom," she said softly, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Michael stood, extending his hand professionally. "Ms. Harris, I'm Michael Abernathy, your mother's attorney. I'll give you some privacy shortly. But first, I want to ensure we're all clear on the parameters of this meeting." Grace nodded, taking the seat opposite me. "Of course." "Mrs. Nelson has agreed to hear what you have to say," he continued. "She has not committed to any particular outcome from this conversation. If at any point she wishes to end the meeting, that decision will be respected immediately and without question. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Grace replied, her gaze never leaving my face. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to speak with her. Michael looked to me questioningly. I nodded slightly, and he gathered his papers. I'll be at that table by the window if you need me, he said, indicating a spot with a clear view of our table, but out of earshot. And then Grace and I were alone together for the first time since that confrontation in Margaret's kitchen nearly 4 months ago. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I sipped my tea, studying my daughter's face, noting the new lines around her mouth, the tension in her shoulders. She looked older, wearier, stripped of the polished confidence I had grown accustomed to seeing. Finally, she broke the silence. I don't know where to begin, she admitted, her fingers fidgeting with a paper napkin. I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times, but now that I'm here... Why don't you start with why you wanted to see me? I suggested, keeping my voice neutral. She nodded, taking a deep breath. First, I need to tell you that I'm sorry. So deeply. Genuinely sorry for how I treated you. For the plans Caleb and I made. For everything. What I did was inexcusable. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. After you left, everything fell apart, she went on. Not just financially, though that was certainly part of it. We had to sell the house. We're in a 2-bedroom apartment now, less than half the size. Emma and Ethan share a room. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Caleb sleeps on the couch. Jennifer mentioned you had sold the house, I said. I'm sorry it came to that. She looked surprised. You've spoken to Jennifer. She called me. She was concerned about the children. Grace's eyes filled with tears. They miss you terribly. Ethan still asks every night when Grandma is coming home. Emma, her voice broke. Emma found your letter under her pillow. The one you left saying you loved her. She sleeps with it under her pillow every night. The image pierced my heart, but I steeled myself. You told them I had a mental breakdown. She had the grace to look ashamed. I was angry and hurt and trying to save face. I told the neighbors that, yes. But I told Emma and Ethan the truth that you had gone to live with your friend because you weren't happy at our house anymore. I hadn't expected this honesty. Thank you for that. At least, Mom, She hesitated, then continued in a rush. I need to tell you what's happened since you left. It's not to make excuses, just to help you understand why I'm here today. I nodded for her to continue. The financial impact was immediate. Of course, without your contribution. We couldn't make the mortgage payment. We tried to sell quickly, but the market was down. We barely broke even after paying what we owed. She paused, taking a sip from a glass of water. But the money wasn't the worst part. It was seeing myself through Caleb's eyes once the pressure was on. He became different, cold, calculating, angry all the time. He started speaking to me the way we had spoken to you. My eyebrows rose at this revelation, but I said nothing. About 2 weeks after we moved to the apartment, I found him going through my personal emails. He was looking for my life insurance information, checking if it would cover our debts if something happened to me. Grace, I breathed, genuinely alarmed. Did he threaten you? She shook her head quickly. Not explicitly, but the way he looked at me that night. I took the kids to a hotel. The next day, I filed for separation. I hadn't anticipated this turn of events. Where is Caleb now? He moved to Milwaukee for a new job. We're finalizing the divorce. He gets the kids 1 weekend a month, but he's already missed 2 visits. Her expression hardened momentarily. He got what he wanted from me, my savings, my good credit score. Once those were gone, so was he. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication that Grace had finally seen Caleb's true nature, concern for her well-being, worry about the children, and a lingering wariness about her motives for this meeting. I'm sorry it ended that way, I said cautiously. That must be difficult for you and the children. It's been the hardest 3 months of my life, she acknowledged. but also clarifying. I finally understand what you meant about dignity, about being valued for who you are, not what you can provide. She reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. Mom, living through this has made me realize exactly what we put you through. The humiliation, the isolation, the fear of having no control over your own life. I experience it every day now. Her eyes met mine, filled with genuine remorse. I can never undo what I did to you. I can never take back Christmas Eve, or the Fernwood plan, or any of it. But I want you to know that I understand now. And I am so sorry. The raw emotion in her voice touched something deep within me. This was not the composed, calculating daughter who had plotted to warehouse me in a cut-rate facility. This was a woman broken by her own mistakes, humbled by consequences, genuinely seeking to make amends. Why are you telling me all this now? I asked, still cautious. She straightened slightly in her chair. Because I want to start rebuilding. If you'll let me. Not for financial help, I'm figuring that out on my own. I've taken a second job on weekends when the kids are with my mother-in-law. We're managing. Just barely. But we're managing. Then what do you want from me, Grace? A chance, she said simply. A chance to show you that I've changed. A chance for Emma and Ethan to have their grandmother in their lives again. They're the innocent ones in all this. Mom, they don't understand why the person they love most in the world disappeared. I felt my resolve wavering. The thought of seeing my grandchildren again, of holding them close, reading them stories, watching them grow, it was powerfully tempting. But could I trust Grace not to revert to her old patterns once the initial crisis had passed? I need time to think about this, I said finally. It's not a simple decision, she nodded, accepting this without protest. I understand. I wouldn't trust me either. After everything, she reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, placing it carefully on the table between us. These are for you. Emma drew the pictures. Ethan dictated the letter to me because he's still learning to write. My fingers trembled slightly as I took the envelope but didn't open it. Mom, Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't expect forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But if you could find it in your heart to consider some kind of relationship, even if it's just occasional supervised visits with the kids, it would mean everything to them. And to me, she stood, gathering her purse. I've taken enough of your time. Thank you for listening. You can contact me through Mr. Abernathy if you decide you want to talk again. As she turned to leave, I found myself speaking. Grace, she paused, hope flickering across her face. How are you really doing, truly? The simple question, the motherly concern it conveyed, seemed to catch her off guard. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, and for a moment I glimpsed the vulnerable child she had once been. I'm scared all the time, she admitted softly. Scared I can't provide for the kids. Scared I'll lose our apartment. Scared I've ruined every important relationship in my life beyond repair. She gave a small, sad smile. But I'm also determined. Determined to be better than I was. To learn from my mistakes. To be the kind of mother you were to me before I forgot what that looked like. With that, she turned and left the cafe, her shoulders straight despite the evident weight she carried. Michael approached my table as the door closed behind her. Are you all right, Mrs. Nelson? I think so, I replied, though in truth I felt emotionally drained. It was not what I expected. Would you like me to call your friend to pick you up? I nodded gratefully. And while Michael made the call, I finally opened the envelope Grace had left. Inside were 2 crayon drawings from Emma, one of our family, with me standing between her and Ethan, all of us holding hands. The other of what appeared to be Margaret's townhouse, with me waving from a window. Beneath my figure, in her careful second-grade handwriting, she had written, "We miss you, Grandma. Please come back." Ethan's contribution was a dictated letter in Grace's handwriting, adorned with dinosaur stickers. Dear Grandma, I am sad you don't live with us anymore. Mommy says you were not happy at our house. I am sorry we made you sad. I promise to be extra good if you come visit us. I learned to tie my shoes all by myself. Can you come see I love you more than T-Rex loves meat? Love, Ethan. Tears welled in my eyes as I carefully returned these treasures to the envelope. By the time Margaret arrived, I had composed myself, but she immediately sensed my emotional state. How did it go? She asked as we walked to her car. It was illuminating, I replied, still processing. Grace has separated from Caleb. They're getting divorced. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. Well, that is unexpected. During the drive home, I shared the details of our conversation, including Grace's apology and request for a second chance. What are you thinking? Margaret asked when I had finished. I gazed out the window at the familiar streets of Chicago passing by. I'm thinking that people can change when circumstances force them to confront the consequences of their actions. I'm thinking that my grandchildren shouldn't suffer for their parents' mistakes. And I'm thinking that holding on to anger, justified as it may be, is exhausting. Margaret smiled slightly. That sounds like you're leaning toward giving her another chance. A carefully measured chance, I clarified. With clear boundaries and expectations. That seems wise, she agreed. And where would these carefully measured meetings take place? You're welcome to use my home, of course. I considered this. Neutral ground might be best, at least initially. Perhaps the park near your house, or even the community center where I volunteer. Somewhere public, but with space for the children to play. By the time we reached Margaret's townhouse, I had made my decision. I would offer Grace a path to reconciliation, not an immediate restoration of trust, but a series of small steps that could, over time, rebuild what had been broken. I called Michael that evening and asked him to arrange another meeting, this time at the community center where I volunteered. Tell her she can bring the children, I instructed. And tell her I'm willing to listen to her proposal for moving forward. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. I bought small gifts for Emma and Ethan, nothing extravagant. Just tokens to show I had been thinking of them. I discussed with Margaret what reasonable boundaries might look like in this new chapter of my relationship with Grace. And I reflected on what forgiveness truly meant in this context. Forgiveness, I concluded, didn't mean forgetting what had happened or pretending it hadn't hurt. It didn't mean removing all consequences or instantly restoring trust. It meant choosing to release the consuming anger that had served its purpose in propelling me to action. It meant opening the door to possibility without abandoning the wisdom I had gained through painful experience. On Saturday morning, I arrived at the community center early, arranging a corner of the children's reading room with comfortable chairs and a low table stocked with books, crayons, and paper. Eleanor, the program coordinator, had been delighted to offer the space when I explained the situation. Family reconciliation is always welcome here, she had said warmly. At precisely 11 a.m., the door opened and Grace entered, holding Ethan's hand while Emma followed close behind. The children spotted me immediately. Grandma! Ethan broke free of Grace's grasp and hurtled toward me, flinging himself into my arms with such force that I nearly lost my balance. His small body was warm against mine, his arms wrapped around my neck in a stranglehold of affection. Emma approached more slowly, her expression a mixture of joy and uncertainty. Is it really you? Grandma, are you really here? I'm really here, sweetheart, I assured her, extending one arm while still holding Ethan. She moved into my embrace, and for a long moment, the three of us simply held each other, a tangle of arms and whispered endearments and tears mine, not theirs, over their heads. I met Grace's gaze. She stood apart, watching us with a bittersweet smile, allowing the children this moment without interruption. I saw in her eyes a mixture of regret for what had been lost and hope for what might still be salvaged. Eventually, the children's excitement gave way to a torrent of news and questions. Emma had lost a tooth. Ethan had learned to count to 100. Their new apartment had a park nearby with the biggest slide ever. Did I still have my yellow bedroom? Why didn't I come to their new home? Could they visit me at Margaret's house? Did Margaret have cookies? I answered their questions as honestly as I could while keeping my explanations age-appropriate. Yes, I had a new room, but it wasn't yellow. No, I hadn't visited their new apartment yet, but perhaps I might someday. Yes, They could visit Margaret's house when the time was right. And yes, she did indeed have Cookie's chocolate chip, their favorite. As they settled in with books and drawing materials, Grace and I moved to a pair of chairs slightly removed from the activity table but still within sight of the children. "Thank you for this," she said quietly. "Seeing them with you again. It's how it should be." "They're remarkable children," I replied. "You've raised them well." Despite everything, she accepted this qualified compliment with a nod. "I'm trying to do better by them. And by you, if you'll let me." "That's why we're here," I said, "to discuss what moving forward might look like." Over the next hour, while Emma and Ethan drew pictures and explored the bookshelves, Grace and I negotiated the terms of our new relationship. We agreed to regular supervised visits at the community center once a week initially, with Margaret or Eleanor present. Grace would not ask for financial assistance, and I would not offer it, though I did mention the education fund I had started for the children. "That's incredibly generous," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They'll need it. College costs keep rising, and I'm still paying off my own student loans." "It's not generosity," I corrected gently. "It's grandmotherhood. It's what James and I always planned to do for your children." As our allotted time drew to a close, I presented Emma and Ethan with the small gifts. I had brought a journal with butterflies on the cover for Emma, a set of realistic dinosaur figurines for Ethan. Their delight was payment enough for the modest expense. "When will we see you again, Grandma?" Emma asked as they prepared to leave. "Next Saturday," I promised. "Same time? Same place?" "I'll be waiting for you." As Grace gathered their belongings, she hesitated, then asked the question that clearly weighed on her mind. "And after that, where do we go from here?" I considered my answer carefully. "One step at a time, Grace. We rebuild trust slowly, deliberately, with honesty on both sides." I can't predict where this path leads, but I'm willing to walk it with you, for the children's sake. And perhaps, eventually, for our own. She nodded, accepting these terms without protest. That's more than I had dared to hope for. After they had gone with hugs and promises of return from the children, a tentative smile from Grace, I sat alone in the reading room, surrounded by the books and drawings and lingering energy of our reunion. Eleanor found me there, contemplatively sipping the tea she had brought. "Successful?" she asked, taking the chair Grace had vacated. "A beginning," I replied. "A fragile one, but genuine, I think." "Beginnings are always fragile," she observed. "That doesn't make them any less important." As I gathered my things to meet Margaret, who would drive me home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, from the humiliation of Christmas Eve to the dignity of setting my own terms for reconciliation, from the exploitation I had suffered to the autonomy I had reclaimed, from the pain of betrayal to the cautious hope of renewal. I had lost much the comfortable illusion of family harmony, the easy trust I once placed in my daughter, the daily presence of my grandchildren in my life. But I had gained something invaluable, the knowledge that I was stronger than I had believed, more capable than others had assumed, and worthy of the respect I had finally demanded. The path ahead remained uncertain. Grace's transformation might prove temporary, a reaction to immediate crisis rather than a fundamental change. Our carefully reconstructed relationship might face new challenges as circumstances evolved. The wounds of the past might reopen with unexpected triggers, but I would face whatever came with clear eyes and firm boundaries, secure in the knowledge that I had fought for and won the most important battle of my later years, the battle for my own dignity. As Margaret drove us home through the sun-dappled streets of Chicago, I thought of James and what he would make of all that had transpired. I could almost hear his voice, gentle but firm. "You did the right thing, Michelle. Both in leaving and in opening the door to return. A mother's love doesn't die, but it shouldn't come at the cost of her self-respect." "Penny for your thoughts?" Margaret asked as we neared her townhouse. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past months lifting slightly from my shoulders. "I was just thinking that dignity can't be stolen, not really. It can be assaulted, threatened, even temporarily obscured. But in the end, it remains within us." waiting to be reclaimed. Margaret nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. And you've reclaimed yours beautifully. That evening, as I sat in the small garden behind Margaret's townhouse, watching the sunset paint the Chicago skyline in hues of gold and pink, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. Not the peace of perfect resolution life rarely offers that luxury, but the deeper peace that comes from standing in your truth, from honoring your worth, from refusing to be diminished by others' limitations. At 67, I had begun again, not the carefree beginning of youth or the optimistic beginning of middle age, but the hard-won, clear-eyed beginning of wisdom. A beginning built on the understanding that love without respect is not love at all, that family ties can bind too tightly if not balanced with healthy boundaries, that it is never too late to stand up for yourself, to reclaim your voice, to insist on your dignity. As the last light faded from the sky, I whispered a promise to myself, to James's memory, to the uncertain future stretching before me. I will not surrender my dignity again, not for convenience, not for peace, not even for love, because without dignity, none of those things can truly exist. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. If you enjoyed this story, you might also like The Inheritance Test and When My Son-in-Law Tried to Take Everything, two other stories that are channel favorites.